Dana and Dana sitting next together, and Susanna and Jordan. So we have Dana Geldward, who is the digital media producer for Girl Up, and then Susanna Meyer, who is a senior at the Hewitt School, which is also she's also part of the Girl Up organization. Jordan Crook from TechCrunch, and Dana Woolman from Engadget. So I'm just gonna jump into this, and I'm gonna put my notes down and my pen down. So I was gonna quote a lot of statistics and everything, but I'm just gonna jump into this because the more I think about this, the angrier I get. So you don't have to look hard for examples of how hard it is to be a woman in tech. So I'm kind of scrolling through my Facebook feed this morning, and the following thing comes up. Carnegie Science Center had a single class for Girl Scouts, while they also offered at least 7 classes for Boy Scouts at a camp that they were doing for the Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts. Now, that's sort of bad on the surface of it, 1 class for Girl Scouts and 7 for Boy Scouts, right? But the class for girls was called Science with Sparkle, so that we could all become cosmetic scientists, right? Because that's what we want to be when we all grow up inside of Women in Tech. And so then, but that kind of culture continues through life. And again, this week, another article came up, this week by Fortune, about why women in tech quit. Basically, they give up. And the article is mostly about, it's not that math is hard, or that we don't know how to do computer science, or that we don't know how to code, or we don't know how to deal with hardware or robotics. It basically is about culture. We get tired of being the only woman in the room. We get tired of being the only 40-year-old woman in the room. We get tired of being the only gay woman in the room. We get tired of just being the odd person out. And so they end up leaving. And they get tired of it. And then finally, there was a report out that Kelly Hoy, who's in the audience, posted on LinkedIn and wrote about, which is that 15% of companies receiving venture funding are run by women, only 15%. And they get less seed and angel investing, even though, and I think that this was a really important point and something we're going to talk a little bit about today, is that women themselves control a vast amount of wealth in this country. So her question, in many ways, was why aren't women investing in women? Why are we leaving it up to somebody else to solve the problem? So without further ado, I'm going to start off by throwing a question to Jordan. Awesome. I'm going to sit down.
I was hoping I would be first.
I don't know why I picked you first.
I don't know either. Let's find out. Let's find out if it was a good call.
So Jordan, we've talked about this, and I think it's, the issue comes up of why have we focused a lot, and I'm not saying that it's a bad focus, on getting girls into coding. So there's a lot of discussion around making sure that girls know how to code. But I think one of the bigger hurdles that we face is with women in tech is that we don't actually see women in tech. We don't have role models. And so I'm wondering why that is and what's holding us up in really exploring what are the broad things, what's the vast world that women could be involved in that isn't just sort of let's get them to code and then unfortunately having a science center give us a class for Girl Scouts on science with Sparkle.
Right. So you asked a lot of things. I'm going to try to nail it down. I think that there are lots of role models, but we're not always, like you said, the visibility for those people isn't necessarily made clear unless they fit into this stereotype of a female founder. So you see people like Sophia Amoruso, right? She gets a lot of credit, and Nasty Gal is a really great brand, but she fits this mold of what we think a female founder should be, so she's lifted up as this girl boss that we should look at. Whereas, and you have to think that the conversation around women in tech is difficult as is, because you can say Marissa Mayer is super, super impressive and intelligent because she's leading this company and she's a woman in tech, a powerful woman in tech. But then, are we giving her extra credit just because she's a woman who's done all the same things that a man has done? And when you have that conversation, you have to be really difficult about how you say, this woman who's done the same thing as a bunch of men is now a hero because she's made it in tech for being a woman in tech. You see how it kind of ends up contradicting itself when you try to have that conversation. So I think that's part of why it's hard to find the female, role model, because there's some sort of difficulty in saying that this woman has accomplished something because she's a woman. She's accomplished something because she's accomplished something, and that's awesome, right?
Right.
And I think that gets convoluted a little bit.
Great. So I think that's a great sort of segue into Dana from Girl Up to discuss sort of a hashtag campaign that you've got going, which is called #GirlHero. It's a digital campaign to rally supporters around the world and create a movement that celebrates girls everywhere. And it can be effective in changing the way we think about girls, heroism, and tech. So tell us more about that and sort of what you're seeing from that campaign.
Absolutely. Well, I love what Jordan said, that there are these heroes, but we just don't see them. We're not acknowledging them. We aren't giving them the platform to be seen. So that's specifically what this campaign is trying to do. To back up a little bit, we started this conversation by talking about International Day of the Girl. It's something that I hope is on everyone's calendar. If it isn't, it's October 11th. It's a Saturday, so it's a perfect day for you guys to celebrate. This is a day as declared by the United Nations, a day for us to speak honestly about the challenges that are facing adolescent girls around the world, not just in developing countries, but also here in the US. And it's a time for us to talk about gender inequality. But it's not all doom and gloom. It's also a time for us to celebrate the immense power of girls, these girl heroes, these girls who are doing amazing things in their community. And frankly, just to talk about how girls are awesome and they rock. And I think everyone here would agree with me on that. So Girl Hero is something that we created in the lead up to International Day of the Girl. We're encouraging supporters to think about who their #GirlHero is. Maybe it's Marissa Mayer, maybe it's the girl in your computer science class, maybe it's Malala Yousafzai, it's your sister, it's your daughter. It can be anyone, but it's someone who inspires you in your community. And we're asking them to post a photo on social media of their girl hero and to tell them why they're their girl hero. And then that person, once they're tagged as a girl hero, is going to keep that momentum going, start this ripple effect, this domino effect of girls rallying behind other girls. And it's really amazing how we're able to utilize social media, utilize technology as this platform to stand behind girls and to empower them and to acknowledge them for things that perhaps on a day-to-day basis they aren't being acknowledged for.
I think it's really interesting to think about being a hero and whether people actually ever tell you that, right? Does anybody ever come up to you and say, hey, Dana, you're my hero? Because, we don't do that, right? And maybe we need to. Maybe we need to be expressing to people why we think, and maybe this is in technology, why we think they're so amazing. Because on a daily basis, I think we constantly, we continue to need that kind of reinforcement. But I want to bring Susanna into the conversation because...
Susanna's my girl hero.
So I think what's interesting, Susanna, I'm just going to let you talk about sort of yourself, and particularly, how did you get into tech? What inspired you? Who inspired you? And then we can talk a little bit more after you go into that.
Sure. So my whole life I've kind of been drawn to math and how analytical but creative it is, and that's kind of where I find the common ground between math and technology. But the first real experience that I've had with programming and technology was in a principles of programming course I took at my school. And I go to an all-girls school, a really small all-girls school here. And so the only people I see working in tech and learning are girls. And so I had never kind of faced this barrier that gender was something that should stop me from going into tech. So that exposure right off the bat was something that's really special to going to an all-girls school. And then in the class, I had no experience at all in programming, and then I started getting into it and learning this programming language called processing. And as I got better and better and more proficient at it, I started to see that I could really take these projects and expand them outside of the classroom and make them into something that didn't just meet the requirements of the class, but they could really have an impact on people and people could use them. And something that's so unique about technology is that you start with nothing but a vision, and then you realize that, and then at the end of it, you have something tangible, something that people can use, and that you can really do anything with, and that's something that is so unique to the field that I'm constantly drawn to it. And you can really integrate technology with any of your passions. It can be music, it can be fashion, it can be cosmetics, but technology really has a place in anything that you want to do, and it just helps you to innovate. And I personally am really passionate about social activism generally, community service, and things like that. So the summer after I learned that programming language and took that class, I went to this engineering program and developed this Android weather app for the visually impaired, just because that's something that interests me. And then, this past summer, I interned with JP Morgan, building some web apps for them that are geared toward their programs that help nonprofits. And, at my school, on the other end of things, I coordinate technology and do like audio and things like that for TEDx conferences, and TEDx conferences have such reach and impact that it's just a way for me to use, my skills and technology and resources and all of that, and just connect people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's interesting, your point, and I'm going to throw it to Dana to talk about sort of taking people out of the box. And Jordan, you talked about this as well, of the great breadth that is out there. And Dana, you review a lot of gadgets. You oversee people who review gadgets. Tell us a little bit about how you think you can actually sort of unbox women, and even in your own writing, how could we do a better job of letting people know there's just a whole host of things that you can do around a technology?
Well, I want to build off something that Jordan said, which I think visibility is really key here, and a certain kind of visibility. It's even in my job, in meeting with companies and taking a look at their new products, it's actually fairly rare for me to find a woman in a creative position. By creative, I mean she's actually responsible for the direction of the product and really deciding what it's going to be and how it's going to develop. I think, if anything, we're more likely to see women like Meg Whitman, the CEO of HP, who maybe have business acumen or maybe in a more financial position, and that's great. But I think it's even rarer still to find women like Marissa Mayer, who made her mark developing Google Maps and other kinds of products. So I think to take women out of the box, we need not just better visibility, but I think in particular we need women getting more public credit for actually creating products and being visionaries and having the vision to create awesome things. And I have no doubt that there are women doing these things at companies, but they're pretty much unsung heroes right now. We don't know who these women are. If it's rare for me to meet these women in product meetings, it's even rarer for the public to see these women creating things. And I think they really deserve more public credit for what they're doing. Mm-hmm.
Dana, I wanted to follow up on that because you have a great interest in sort of the digital divide, and I think that there's a connection in this. In that we don't see, even though there are women using technology and are in the technology field, we don't see them. And I wonder how that digital divide in any way has anything to do with that. And I don't know if we can make those connections, or we can just talk about the digital divide.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Digital technologies, we know, we can talk about it at length, all five of us, can talk about how important and critical it is to feeling self-worth and self-empowerment. But for far too many women and girls around the world, they're just out of reach for them. Some statistics that we know is that 300 million fewer women in low to middle income countries have mobile subscriptions, and 200 fewer women are actually online. So we're not just talking about a digital divide here, we're also talking about a gender gap in technology. And that's something that I think we all feel frustrations too. And it's not necessarily that this reach of technology doesn't exist. It does. In some of the most rural countries, we have the infrastructure in place and we have the resources. The fact is, for many girls in developing countries, they're being prevented from having access to these resources. They're being kept in the home, they're feeling the burden of doing household chores, they're being forced to drop out of school, getting married too early. So it's something that I think concerns all of us because we know, and Susanna is a prime example of this, technology is extremely empowering for girls and women. And we know that if girls have better access to technology, we can reduce poverty, we can increase education retention rates, and really eliminate the lines of gender inequality. So I think I'm pretty comfortable on this panel that we can tackle it together, and I'm really glad that the United Nations is prioritizing something like this, but it's clearly a big, big issue today.
So I'm going to jump actually to sort of talking about the technologies that we think already exist or we would potentially like to see or maybe we've heard about that we think actually are helping sort of bridge this digital divide or deal with the issues of women. And so, you know, I think I mentioned at one point when we were meeting about Girl Up and being here, sort of this circle of 6, which is a bracelet that you can wear that, you know, will, if you are in trouble, if something happens to you, it will actually ping 6 of your friends and let them know something's wrong, which I think is really fascinating. Although I wonder, you know, what that means and is that a good technology? And then the other one, I know we've written about it on TechCrunch. You know, is apps that are created in India to help women know where sexual violence actually happens so you can stay away from those areas and make sure, so that's a mapping device. So I don't know if we kind of just want to go around of what you think are technologies that you've heard that you really think are trying to, one, and I don't think they have to be created by women, but really are starting to address these issues of how does technology help women do different things, feel safer, whatever it is. And Dana, I'll start with you.
I think Circle of 6 is a great example, and I know it's been a little bit controversial. I think it is great that so long as this problem of violence against women is not going away, I think it's great that women get this additional tool to possibly empower themselves. I hope any given woman does not find herself in that sort of situation, but I think it's just fantastic that they have at least another option at their disposal designed for them to empower them if something bad does happen.
Mm-hmm. Jordan, anything from your perspective?
Yeah, so I'm a little bit hesitant to even give my own answer because I feel like it might be construed the wrong way, but there's this new, you know about this, Dana, the Intel Mica bracelet. And the reason why I say that is because it's really just a very, very pretty, it's like a $300 bracelet that's connected to the internet, gives you your notifications. And that sounds slightly shallow to say that this is making life better for women. But the reason that I say that is because for a really long time, tech was focused on like, throw some pink on it, and that's what a woman needs, right? Or like, one, that there are a lot of different needs that a woman has from a man when you're approaching gadgetry, and then the second one is that if it's pink, then a woman will use it, and that's what she needs, and that's the differentiator. I don't think that this Mica thing is necessarily like a huge step towards understanding like the female gadget consumer, but it like seems to be putting some effort towards what a woman is looking for in a way that hasn't really happened before. Would you agree with that, or do you totally disagree?
Actually, I've really long felt that the problem with creating female gadgets is that until now, again, they've been slapped in pink, basically, and they've been condescending. And I think what you really need to do is think of women not as a separate kind of consumer, but as a mainstream consumer. In the case of wearables, for instance, I think a lot of people, both men and women, have been put off by smartwatches precisely because they're big and bulky and aggressively masculine, even for some men. So I think when you do create a more stylish bracelet, you're not just going after women, but you're taking a step toward creating a more acceptable, more stylish accessory for men also. And that's kind of what I like about
only men.
Yeah, so I think it's a step in the direction of treating women not as this weird niche, but as
people with brains who want to buy good things.
A segment of the mainstream. If you can please women, you can probably please men too, because we're all part of the same general mainstream. If people fall into a bell curve of taste, women are clumped in the middle probably somewhere with men. So I appreciate Intel going in that direction.
Yeah. I'll just interject before I go to Dana and Susan. I had an opportunity to give a speech a few weeks ago because I wrote a book a few years ago on women and economic power and how you reach women in the marketplace, and found myself on a stage in which I was the only woman for an entire sort of 5-hour conference talking about marketing to women, I was the only woman on stage. The rest of the speakers were all men, to which I could not understand how this was possible, that this was happening 10 years after I wrote my book. And it still intrigues me. This goes back to visibility. There must be women out there who are doing these things, who are integrally involved in doing this, but we don't bring them on stage. We don't look at them as people who should be spokespeople. So I think it's a long-standing problem. But Dana, what for you do you think is like a technology that's really sort of groundbreaking when it comes to either something that focuses on women or focuses on the issues of women?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I don't know, I guess to kind of take a different approach to it, I think it's really amazing that there are these apps that are teaching people step-by-step how to code, because all these girls around the world have phones. They have access to technology, unless they don't. But if they do, they're constantly on their phones and using it as an educational tool and using it as a way to build their interest in something like technology, in something like programming, I think is a really powerful use of the tool. I just like the fact that we're seeing more tools now like Duolingo, which teaches you language in a very easy step-by-step way. More apps that aren't just about photo sharing, which is important, but are also about educational and building girls' minds and getting them interested in different topics.
Susanna, what would you say?
Something that's just a little more relevant to here right in New York is a web service called She Taxi, I believe it's called. And what it does is it allows you to request like a yellow taxi cab or another car or something like that with a female driver. And assault and harassment with car services and taxis is something that's not talked about, but is definitely an issue. And sometimes it's on the news, but sometimes it's just completely ignored. And that's a way for women to feel safe at night or whatever it is. And just my general opinion is that it's unfortunate that these technologies are necessary, because it just implies that we're really not there yet to a state of equality and a safe place for women. But while the problem is there, it's definitely something helpful and a resource that can be used.
It's pretty interesting. Anything else come to mind in terms of technology or apps or things that you think are sort of really breaking the mold when it comes to women? Anything?
Like a pop quiz? Like, did we talk about something that we forgot to mention right now?
No, I'm just making sure.
Okay. Just making sure that I did the right
just
homework.
Like looking at you like, did you,
I know, and I'm like,
I
thought I had a really good answer too, so.
Anyway, Susanna, you also have worked on a blog or written a blog, which I thought was really interesting, called STEMinism. And I wonder if you can talk about that and how you use that blog to really talk about gender imbalance.
Sure. So the same year that I first took that programming course that I talked about, I was assigned in an English class a fairly open-ended blog project where we were to write a series of blog posts all on the same general theme. And I chose what I call STEMinism, which combines STEM and feminism. And feminism, a lot of people think of it as kind of a dirty word. I see it just as meaning gender equality, which I think is something important that a lot of people should, come to realize. But essentially, it was just me researching the gender disparity that exists in STEM fields and kind of why the gap exists, looking at some statistics, and then trying to figure out how we can eliminate it or what's still there. And I found that there's just so much stigma and so many stereotypes that still prevail that intimidate girls or hold them back from wanting to pursue tech at all. And it's just in the media or just generally, women in tech are presented as anomalies, exceptions to the rule being men in technology, boys in technology. And I think what needs to change is we need to start focusing on a woman or a person who happens to be in technology doing really innovative things, who happens also to be a woman, and looking more at the story of it rather than here's another woman in technology or this is something that's rare, which is something that I found. And I think it's just important that girls know going into tech that this gender gap exists so that they can build the confidence that they need. And unfortunately, a girl in technology, it's more likely than not that she might be judged or someone might doubt her because of her appearance or her gender, but the reality of it is really important to recognize and just know it's there and talk about it and try to alleviate it while we can.
So a question for you, and then we can talk more about sort of feminism and STEMinism. You go to an all-girls school. Do you worry about when you get out into the world in which it is where you're not just surrounded by women? Does that concern you and sort of what you're going to have to face?
Right. So even at my school, the interest in technology isn't as great as I might like to see it. But the engineering program that I talked about, where I built that Android app, I was actually one out of 4 or 5 girls out of a total of 60 or 70 students. So that was definitely a shock to me, and I think I was prepared just because of the all-girls environment and just the confidence in my abilities that I had, built up. But it definitely takes some getting used to and realizing that, you might not be as welcome just because you're a girl, and it's really important to know that that's not a measure of your inability or ability at all, and it's just something that exists in the real world. So that was definitely something that, going to an all-girls school, obviously I could not have been completely prepared for that, but that's why I think talking about this gender gap is really important, so that you know that when you step outside of that little bubble, it's not all girls in technology.
Right. So I'm not necessarily a huge fan of sort of here's advice for Susanna today, but Dana had mentioned this in terms of sort of how she deals with sort of what she faces in her job, sort of the explanation that happens sometimes. So maybe talk about what it is and then how you effectively sort of get around it.
Right. I mean, even now that I'm managing editor of a big tech blog and I've been covering technology for the better part of a decade, I still encounter sexism. And it usually comes in the form of mansplaining. People, usually men, explaining to me in really watered down terms concepts that they wouldn't dare otherwise explain to my male colleagues, that are simple enough for a seasoned tech writer to understand. I once had someone at a big company, I won't mention the name, try and explain to me what an FCC label was on the back of a phone. And anyone who's been doing this forever or for years knows what that is. And I try and keep my cool. I definitely don't want to confirm a stereotype that women are shrill and emotional, but I don't let it slide. Usually my response on some form, whether sometimes I'm more subtle than others, but my response is usually to somehow let the person know I know what I'm talking about. I can usually do it politely, usually do it fairly subtly, but I don't let it slide.
Any other, Jordan, piece of advice or
I do.
thoughts?
I have some follow-on thoughts to that. I think, I come at it from a different perspective because I grew up gay in Dallas. So to me, being like a woman in tech feels like I feel great. Like people treat me so well. Are you kidding me? Like comparatively, like this is awesome. I'm a rock star. But one thing that I did notice, and this has actually happened kind of recently, is like I can be part of the problem and I didn't realize that maybe before, right? And it became really poignant to me. And sorry if this story is a little too long, but I was at a dinner and one of my close friends is a female founder. And she was having a drinks with someone, and I was with a guy, and he said, "Oh, it looks like she's on a date." And I said, "Well, she's a founder, and he's a founder. They're having drinks, and they're discussing something. Why would you, if it was a guy founder and a guy founder, would you think that they're out on a date? Why is it that, you know what I mean?" And they weren't. They were discussing business stuff, and I thought, yeah, go Jordan. You've called out sexism. And I find myself, meeting a female founder and breaking the ice with, "I love your shoes." And I can break the ice with a lot of different things, but, I find myself almost adding to that with little assumptions that I make and little thoughts that I have and ways that I approach situations. And I'm sure that it's less sexist than some male counterparts of mine, but you can be an example. I think that's the most important thing, is like any discriminated group, the only way that you fight back against that, and the only way you actually make any real change is to say that if you think that I'm this or that because I'm gay, or you think I'm this or that because I'm a woman, I'm going to be what I am, and you're going to see it whether you like it or not. And I think that's the only way that you can do things, and to call out people when they're part of the problem too. Don't be afraid. If someone says something that's blatantly sexist to you, like she said, you might seem emotional or shrill, but at least you're like reminding that person who might not even know what they're saying, because a lot of times sexism comes out and people don't, oh man, I didn't even realize that was so hateful or rude of me to think that, right? To assume that. So I think that if you can call people out and you can remember to be an example, that's like the first step towards making a real change, I think.
Yeah, before I give it to Dana, I agree with you that being an example is really important, and also realizing that the way you feel about a situation is not the way all women feel about a situation. We always have something to learn. So I was running the Nike half marathon last year, or some year, and there were these people along the route with these signs up that say, hey, you look great in those running shorts or whatever, and I thought they were funny, and there was like a hashtag, and and I literally thought they were just funny and sort of ironic or whatever. But some young women who met me at the finish line, particularly who are very much they're feminists. They are sort of very hardcore feminists too, like big F feminists, were horrified by them. And they took photos of them, and they started a Twitter campaign against the cosmetics company because they're like, you have created an unsafe space. And it was the first time I'd heard the concept of safe space, and that these women didn't feel safe. And it was so strange to me. But what I loved was they went to social media, which, if I was to say, is one of those technologies, like with the hashtag for Girl Hero or any of those. How do we feel about sort of using social media for sort of change? Does it do anything? And I'll throw it to you, Dana.
Yes, and this is actually what I'm really passionate about, and that's what my role is with Girl Up. I think it's interesting, a lot of the girls who get involved with Girl Up, and the boys too, because we do have a solid number of boys and men who are very interested in empowering girls and women, which is incredibly important to have the entire community rallying behind eradicating gender inequality. But it's interesting, we had a meeting with all of our girls last year, and we talked to them about how their community reacts when they say that they're involved with Girl Up, and what people say to them. And on the by and large, people are incredibly positive. They're really impressed by the actions that they're taking. But some boys at their school are a little bit negative towards them and say things to them, and they are actively experiencing negative comments from people about their interest in empowering their peers in developing countries and about empowering themselves in the process. So we talked to them a little bit about that, and I think what we really realized is that it's important to have groups like Girl Up. It's important to have groups like your friends and surround yourself with people who have the same interests as you, who have the right morals and are passionate about the same things as you are. All you really need is that one person who agrees with you to make you feel even more confident about the stance that you're taking, and then you can power forward.
Anybody else on sort of how social media either is useful to this or maybe not useful to this? Susanna?
Yeah. I think as a whole, social media can be a really, really powerful tool if it's used in the right way. A lot of times it's used as kind of this barrier so that you can say whatever you want to say that's negative because you're not face-to-face with a person or something like that. But generally, I think just, I run the Girl Up New York Coalition, and we use social media, Facebook groups, and all of that to stay connected, and I think in that way it's a really powerful tool, but also just to start social media campaigns and just spread the word that way, because so many people are on social media, so many people are using it, that it's just a really great way to spread that idea and the concept of gender equality and all of that, and in that way it's effective. But if it's abused, then that all kind of falls away.
Yeah, and yesterday, for example, we had a graphic that just said, I raise my voice for girls around the world. It seems really simple. And we just encouraged people to share it. And it's amazing to see how many people come together to share that and the ripple effect that that has. And once they share that with their networks, more people are exposed to the idea of supporting the empowerment of girls around the world. And so all the comments that filter in, it's just really exciting to see that there is such a global community and such an effort to rally behind this issue and this cause, and a lot of it is happening digitally.
Mm-hmm. Anybody, Jordan, thoughts or?
I think the whole change via social media thing is really interesting because we've seen in the past with other things, maybe not gender equality, but we've seen it in the past make huge changes. So there's that, but there's also the side that feels a little bit empty. When someone posts I'm so sad, R.I.P. Grandpa, you died last year, blah, blah, blah. And it gets 53 likes. And of all those likes, how many of those people took a moment to think about this person's real feelings toward their grandpa and the loss and that, did you really feel, is that really worth what it would be in person or whatever, right? So I think the question is with social media is about around the content that can actually change behavior. What can get someone to look at it and think about it and share it in a way that's I actually am putting my stamp of approval on this. I believe in it, and I want people to hear about it, as opposed to I need to like it or I need to retweet something, and it's just this kind of mindless. Because I think that social media can become mindless, and that doesn't mean it doesn't affect change. It's still getting out there and being shared. But what content can really change behavior while it's being shared?
Right. I want to throw it open to our audience with questions or comments or anything. Yeah.
Shout out to all the boys who are here.
Oh, come on. I know there are people with questions. Or I'm going to force it.
Thank you guys all for being here. And Susanna, you're all inspirational, but Susanna, you're really inspirational, and I can't believe you're in high school. So I am here at AOL, and I'm helping to start up the AOL Foundation, which is going to be focused on empowering women, girls, leadership development, and also underrepresented youth. But I was at a conference last week with a number of other funders in this space of coding and how to support getting girls into tech. And some of the problems that exist are how you can educate parents and teachers to encourage young girls to get into this space. So I just wanted to know, from your perspectives, if you have different programs in place to really first educate parents and teachers to be able to get girls involved and excited about it.
That one's for me, not Susanna, right? Yeah, I think that we don't have necessarily a direct approach to that. I think we focus on the empowerment of the girl and making a girl feel confident and comfortable and strong and bold and moving forward with whatever it is that she's passionate about. And I think you can see that in Susanna. We have such a broad range of interests of the girls in our programs, and we're currently nearing nearly 500,000 supporters around the world. We have 500 clubs in 44 countries, so a really broad swath of different types of girls in different communities. So I think really the strength of the program is connecting them with each other. Susanna connects with a number of people in the New York Coalition, and that people get to see that Susanna's building apps and working at a major bank and doing things in tech and programming and doing so without skipping a beat or anything. I think that in itself is the power of the program too.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, that question of who are the people in your life who actually support this, because it is going to be those people who actually sort of give you the boost or are supportive of you. And I don't know, Susanna, did you have, were your parents really into this, or did you just kind of fall into it?
My parents are definitely supportive. They don't exactly understand it. And I think what's important is just that encouragement and the support and the attempt to respect and understand what you're doing. And I think what's just really effective with parents and adults generally is if they can see what's on the other end of it, if they can see what, high school or college, whatever student has created, then it really can open their eyes and they can kind of see what you can do with it. And I think it's just really important as much to educate students, to educate parents about it, teachers, and just kind of having them get a sense of what programming, what computer science is all about, because if they're too far removed from the process, it becomes kind of an independent journey, which you shouldn't depend on anyone necessarily, but it should be, collaborative and helpful.
Yeah, that kind of independent journey can be pretty tough. So, questions?
Hi, this is more for Dana and Jordan, because you guys have sort of an insider perspective on the industry. What companies out there right now would you say are actually doing a really great job of empowering their female employees, and what can other companies learn from what they're doing?
That's the saddest part of the question, is like literally, if I'm thinking in my mind right now, I was actually, like I said, at a panel earlier this morning at Tech Week, and I knew that I was coming to this, so I was asking some of the male founders, what's your breakdown? Like, how many employees do you have, and how many are female and men? Most of the time, like, the numbers I was getting was something around like 2 out of 15, 3 out of 15, right? And they're like, they're worried that I'm about to write a scoop, so they're obviously like panicking about why I'm asking, and I was really just curious as to how you work at it. And what I hear constantly is we don't have enough to choose from. I don't know if that's the man's excuse, right? Do they not? I don't know, because I'm not hiring women. That's the best answer I have for you. I can't think of one single company that is except for AOL and TechCrunch, of course, that is working to empower females like myself. But
I paid her to say that. But,
pig money to say that. I'll get my check later. What about you? Any thoughts?
Right, of those big companies that have dared to release publicly diversity numbers, they've all been really bleak, not just for women, but minorities also. And there are certain companies that I think won't even go there, just because I think they know their numbers paint a really sad, depressing story. I don't cover startups the way Jordan does, so it's harder for me to speak to maybe smaller up-and-coming companies, but I do think that trend at the top, companies like Facebook and Yahoo and Google, I do think that probably reflects the industry as a whole. All of us had a chance to read this article on diversity and women's satisfaction in the tech industry before we all got on stage here, and I think it was pretty common, right, to have women just be the only ones.
Yeah, sort of again feeling like you're the only woman in the room, and we're here talking about tech, but it's not the only space, right? I used to cover the auto industry, and the number of women, one, covering the auto industry, and two, in the auto industry, was abysmally low. Unless, of course, you were a rivet head and worked on the line, and then there were women there. But, it's sort of like, oh, isn't it heroic that, Mary Barra is running General Motors? We still look at that and go, wow.
That
like,
should
how
feel
did
normal, right?
And what?
That should feel normal.
It should feel normal, but it doesn't. It still feels special or awkward at the same time.
Ask questions about balancing motherhood that a male executive
would
Same
never.
thing happened to Marissa over and over again. You're going to be pregnant. How are you going to run Yahoo? And it's like the same way I ran everything else for the last 12 years. I'm awesome, right? Like,
right.
It's a silly thing, I think. What I was going to say is, like, to your question, when we're talking about like the way that when I encounter sexism, or I encounter that in the startup world particularly, it comes from this place where it always seems like I almost feel like poor dudes because they don't even know what they're saying, right? It's almost like it comes from this place of, in some ways, yeah, it's very like meaningful and they actually are sexist and they know they're sexist. And then there's these times when they say something and they don't, like she said, mansplaining. He doesn't really think about the fact that it might be offensive to her that he's explaining what an FCC label is, right? Which is why, like, I kind of harped a little bit on the be an example thing, because the only way you stop anything like that from the top down is to just say, you can't talk to me like that, and you can say it with a smile, but, I actually am very, very well aware of what an FCC label is. Thank you.
Yeah. And by the way, there's a more insidious kind of sexism that I've seen, too. I don't know how much you've seen this, but, where men will flirt with me, get a little too cozy, and I think both with that and with mansplaining, it can be very socially convenient to dumb yourself down. And that's what I mean when I say I don't let it slide. I don't mean that I'm nasty or really combative, but I can't stand down and I can't dumb myself down. And I think that goes both whether men are flirting with me or whether they're mansplaining, and they don't necessarily mean it. They might think they're being friendly.
Or charming, or like this is the best way for them to get what they need out of the situation, right?
It might be socially convenient to go along with it, but I can't.
Right.
I feel worse for female founders, to be perfectly honest about it, because a lot of them, when they, you're kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't, because you, on the one side, you can be really technical and maybe launch like a finance startup, and then you're held to the same standard as all these men, but without all the freedom. So a guy can be super quirky or this or that and still be really good at being a founder, whereas a girl, if she's a founder, has to be really good at a founder, and really that's all. There's no leeway to be, bubbly or kind of silly or really smart or really tough, right? So a female founder, whether she's in something technical or she's in a more woman niche-focused company, has to play this perfectly balanced, perfectly rehearsrsed part. She cannot be a male founder who can be a bunch of things as well as good at being an entrepreneur, right?
Right. Yeah, I think what's interesting, Sarah, to your question, though, I think in technology, at least even 10 or 15 years ago when I covered it more intensely, I think there was the thought that this was going to be different, that this sector was actually going to be different, because a woman, created the Palm Pilot, which is now, sitting on a shelf at some museum. But there were women. I mean, Meg Whitman at eBay. There was this sense that, wow, there are more women coming out of engineering and computer science and everything, and yet a decade later, I'm still sitting here listening. I understand it from the auto industry. I may understand, I might not agree with it, but technology I thought was going to be different, that the playing field was going to be flatter. And I'm wondering why it's not. Thoughts? Maybe Kelly can answer this.
Yeah, she's going to.
I'm just going to throw it to Kelly.
I don't know if I can answer that. I want to go actually back to Sarah's question. So I immediately think of Etsy, and they made a concerted effort to get more female engineers. And then the other one I always think of is AT&T because of the number of women engineers that company has. But the saddest thing, it gets back to what you said right at the beginning, which is about visibility. And one of their engineers, Marion Croak, who is African American on top of that, holds the most patents in AT&T's history. And we don't know who she is, right? It's like we forget that Sandy Lerner co-founded Cisco. Right, and sort of this lost in all this history. So it's a complicated one to unpack, and I want to say kudos to all of you for taking it on this afternoon.
Trying to unpack it, sort of. Suzanne, how are we on time? Come on, one break. Nicole, thank you.
Do you think Marissa Mayer would get the same coverage or visibility if she walked out in public in a hoodie like Mark Zuckerberg?
If Marissa Mayer did it, given her history, if she walked out in a hoodie now, she'd get twice as much attention as she normally gets, because that would be shocking. Right. Before, I think that people choose. So I've spoken to Marissa a few times, and after speaking to her, I realize why people are so addicted to covering her, whatever she does, and it's because she really is a commanding, brilliant, like everything that you read about her that says that she's awesome is very much true, in my opinion. She's super cool and has a lot to teach you in a small conversation. To your question, no, probably not. She has a number of different things that she can get coverage on, and part of that is fashion, and she's made herself an influencer in that realm. And what I think is cool about her is she uses that to kind of bring back in her own stuff. I think she's leveraging something and building a brand around the side of her that has to do with fashion. She never lets a conversation be around her dress only, and that's what's cool about Marissa.
Great. Well, I wanted to thank our panelists, and particularly Susanna, thank you so much, and Dana coming from Girl Up, and of course Jordan and Dana, thank you for getting on stage with me, and thanks so much for the turnout here and for everyone coming. Thanks, Suzanne.
Thank you.